Wolfgang, it's so good of you to do this interview today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about your stuff. I remember when we first met, it was in Oxford at the conference, and there was an auction of promises coming up. And I think it was your idea that we collaborated on a performance, and I played the double bass and you were body juggling. And you've just reminded me that we actually raised about £400 for
Yeah,
a
yeah,
very good cause that
yeah, very good.
was
Yeah.
involved. So I really enjoyed that. And I can actually remember some of the things that I played during that improvisation. And it was exciting. And so thank you for that. These years after the event, it's still sticking in my memory. It's great. So I know you've done some very interesting teaching all over the world. You've worked in schools, you've worked in theatre, and you've worked with teacher trainees, Alexander teacher trainees. And so we're going to cover all of those things. The first question I'd really like you to tackle is just let us know when you first bumped into the Alexander technique, when you found it. Where was that?
Well, it was in 1987 when I went to the full-time circus school in Bristol. It was at St. Paul's, and there was a riot going on, and it was in the middle of the black area. So it was a rough time. My acrobatic and movement teacher also included the Alexander work in her teaching, and I experienced doing acrobatics and movement in a much more effortless and easier way, which not only was a better technique, even so there was a technical advantage, but it was a much better ease with that. So I couldn't afford any lessons at that time, so I got myself Barlow's book of the Alexander Principle, and I was patiently laying down 20 minutes on the floor and giving myself directions. It was first in the beginning of the 90s I came seriously into studying and considering of training the Alexander technique.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember the Barlow book. It was the only book that was available at the time. Even the Alexander books were out of print,
Yeah,
and all the more modern books hadn't been written then. So yeah, in the late 80s, that's what you had to read. It was Barlow or nothing, wasn't it?
it was Barlow's book and Chris Stevens' book, actually, which is still out of print, which is also just a little book with cartoons, which came in the beginning of the 80s, I think, something there.
Oh, really, I didn't find that one. Well done for finding it. So I know the book now, but I thought it was published later than my training. And your training, where did you
Yeah,
train?
well, in going from England back to Sweden, I met an Alexander teacher. Well, I met several Alexander teachers there where I had lessons from, but it was Trisha Hemingway who convinced me to start training. And I went to a lot of different courses in England, in Denmark, in Germany, Switzerland, and I ended up in Totnes in the southwest of England, starting to train with Jörn Haar. And at that time, he collaborated a lot with Tommy Thompson and David Gorman in '93.
Yes.
And from there, I went on to David Gorman's training course. And from there on, I went to Germany to do a more Israeli Cooperman styled training course in Freiburg, where I did my last year. So it took me 5 years to do my training with a lot of different teachers and styles into it.
It's a very exotic international training you did. It sounds terrific. So I just stuck to, I was working in London at the time, so I stayed at one school. But I have had influences from all over the world, various different teachers, as we all do, don't we? It's
Yeah,
marvelous that the work is developing in all the different countries.
I think
And
so.
so your background, it's in circus. Your BA was in circus skills, yeah?
Yeah. Well, it's in physical theater, as it was at that time, street theater from the 60s, 70s. It developed into a group where we did basking. And the most known branch of this school is probably the Lecoq School in Paris, or the School of Blue Lake in the States. And my school was in Copenhagen, but it had the same origin, where I trained as a comedian, clown, physical theater, circus person, and with the circus training. And that was already at 85. So I started with the theater first before I came into the Alexander technique.
Mm-hmm. Which of course is what Alexander did. He started in the theatre
Yep.
and came into
Yeah.
the work, yeah. And your MA, your master's, the pedagogy with a particular reference to somatics, that does sound so appropriate for an Alexander teacher. Could you talk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, experiencing through my training a lot of, let's say, different opinions about different branches and different ways of working within the Alexander School. And also within the training, the references to Dewey and to pedagogics and to the educational world, I found the need of learning more into this field. And actually, before I did my master, I also did a teacher certificate for upper secondary degree, where I actually started to get engaged into pedagogics, into what Dewey said, what Montessori said, what other pedagogic theories said, and from there it broadened in a way my perspective to the Alexander technique. And after that, I found that there were, of course, a lot of other somatic techniques as well. If it was Feldenkrais, Tai Chi, contact improvisation, Qigong, and cranial sacral therapy, and dancing, and all these things. So I in a way wanted to learn what the common ground is for this, and how I can use the Alexander technique in it.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask you where you teach now and who are you teaching?
Well, at the moment I teach 1 to 3 year old children in a kind of different way, because we are into kindergartens doing a performance which is focused on perception and sound and balance. And we do a little performance, and then we have a workshop. But I work with them balancing on balance beams and building things. So I actually get my hands onto these children and doing interactive work with them, even in this pandemic time. And the fascinating thing is, it's a completely you cannot talk. You have to act. It's a communication out of perception, and it has been really valuable to do this. Besides of that, I also have other teaching assignments where I've been working on the university for preschool teachers, and occasionally also for primary school teachers in the teacher education. And I've been on training courses, a regular guest teacher for the students there. And I have a little private practice as well.
Yes, I actually saw that there was on your website, there's a lovely recommendation from Rick Brennan. He's appreciated your visits there. And I know that LCAT in London, the school, they're very interested in your visits. I think it's such fun getting involved in the sort of work that you take people through, that the trainees, if they've seen you before, they're hoping you're coming again.
Yeah, well, in a way, it has been quite alive, as I have been doing different things, and because of the circus and the juggling and the rope walking background, I have developed for this type of work more an approach that you do things that people are not used to do. And when people do new things, you always have the advantage to get, in a way, the first reaction, and to get a very good way of being able to work with people.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You talked about working with teachers who work in schools, young children schools. Would you say that the Alexander technique has a value for every teacher in all school situations?
I would say so. Definitely within, or also outside the classroom. And when I started training, actually where we met in Oxford 2004, I had a 3 years project where I had been working with teachers and headmasters. Because moving to an island, in a way, working more educationally and not performing so much here in Sweden, I realized it's not good to try to work with the children. You have to make the teachers understand. that it's valuable. And the teacher, as an example in front of the classroom, has a lot of difficulties to maintain their good, let's say, example to the children, how they can show the children something, how they can do things. And a lot of psychophysical problems as well as burnouts and different things have helped the teachers there to cope in a better way. And at that time, I also had the chance to get my hands onto the headmasters. So the headmasters have given their blessings for the teachers to do it, so that you could do it as a project in the classroom. So I think that's a very good way to work.
Yes, if it's possible, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Have you got any secrets about how to get the headmaster or the headmistress to allow you to work with them? Because
Well,
yep,
basically, they have to be interested. but it has been the interest from the school, and I was lucky when I came that the headmasters were interested and that they were saying, "Oh, that's a good idea." And I had the chance to be on a day where they had this teacher professional development for teachers, where I presented the work and I did hands-on work, and people liked it, and then they wanted to have it as a regular group. And then we found some money for the European Union at that time to do a project, and then I could start this project. But in general, that's a very difficult thing to make it permanent in the educational space or in the school, because there's always the problem of the money, and that it's often an activity outside the curriculum and not inside the curriculum.
yes. So we're very lucky at the Royal College of Music, of course, because we managed to embed it into the curriculum.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
really, it's because of the person who was in a position to allow that suggestion to be brought before the people who made the decision. So there are
Yeah,
various groups of people in all institutions who are making decisions.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think something that occurs to me is if the person that you've approached doesn't bite, they're not interested. And then you just keep an eye on when they leave, when somebody else comes into the job, then you go and have a go with them, because you just have to have the right person in that role. And then the door is open and you're in, and it can become part of the curriculum.
yeah. Yeah. And when I made my studies for my master, and you had to look into how to do research, you were always asked to find the key holder. That
Yeah,
means that's the person at the job which allows you to do your investigation. And even if there was no money involved, but it was always this kind of question, well, who has the authority to permit me to do what I want to do there?
absolutely. So the next question I'd like to ask is how you see that Alexander has affected your performing. So you're a great performer. I've worked with you. I've seen you. I've seen videos of you, and there are videos that I'm interested in editing into this interview. So everyone seeing this interview will see you performing. And can you talk about how the technique has supported or influenced your performing?
It has influenced me a lot, because when I started out, I actually was thinking I'm quite good in performing. And doing my training, I actually found out there was a lot of limitation and a lot of stiffness and a lot of, I thought I was doing something different that I actually was doing. And I remember during my years of training, we had a performance which we had done before my training. I actually had to relearn my part after the 2 years of training, because the movement didn't fit anymore. The training, the work changes on such a fundamental way, so you have to adjust or to relearn it. It's like when you had very good Alexander lessons, you misplace things. You drink a cup and you want to put it on the table, and you put it somehow beside the table. Your measurement gets changed, and I would say the Alexander work has changed my measurement there quite a lot. And it helps me often to find my timing in the performance. so that it's more fluent or more out of the present moment instead of something you have decided from before. And in our improvisation, it was really the improvisation, which is the Alexander technique. Sometimes I think when I work with a student or a pupil, it is in a way an improvisation because you don't know where it leads you. So it has really improved my improvisations and feeling safe with improvising.
Marvelous. And have you worked with other performers on dealing with performance anxiety?
Partly with performance anxiety, but often on an individual level. When we had performers, they always had their share of things. Physical problems, sometimes performance anxiety, but a lot of manu depressive, like the performers, they have to be really spot on, and they are really giving everything, and then they're going quite low afterwards and becoming depressive. So with the performance anxiety, it has often been just a part within the teaching, not actually getting into this kind of what's it called, triggering the performance anxiety. Like when I have some musicians to work with, before they play the first tone, it's this huge impact where you have to deflect this energy and to find a more softer bass or a more easier bass to start to work with.
So in thinking about that,
Yeah.
how is the balance between psychological stuff and physical habit? Psychological habit, physical, emotional habit?
I would say it's for me no difference, because I mean, speaking with you in the interview and thinking of performance in a wider sense, not just performing. I mean, I'm performing here. It's an excitement coming up, and if my excitement is getting too high, I'm getting over engaged and I'm running ahead and I'm getting nervous and I'm getting tensed and I'm getting excited, and the interview becomes not as good maybe as it could be. Where is it, if I can be in time with my performance and I can remind myself of staying in a way in relation to you, it helps me to get rid of my anxiety. But I wouldn't necessarily call it anxiety. I would call it an overdoing. It's too much energy in it.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to regulate. The stronger the stimulus becomes, the stronger it is to regulate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While you were talking about your work and the circus work, I was thinking about balance, and there quite a lot of the Alexander teachers that I know are using the 3 questions that Lee Warren formulated: am I breathing, am I balancing, and am I seeing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of balancing going on in your performing. Breathing and seeing. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, also from the things I've been writing on, for me, the balance is not necessarily the little thing between the ear. For me, the balance is also, as Walter Carrington said, balance as a function of intelligence. Balance and hearing is the same thing as the whole kinesthesia and the proprioception into it. So working with balance is not a balance activity or the act of balance, but the balance as the sensoric functioning in it. And I mean, the sense of, for balancing, you need everything. You need you just need it. So it's all inclusive, I would say.
Fantastic, thank you. Big question maybe, or maybe a small question. What for you is at the heart of the Alexander technique? Have you got any advice for teachers who are just finding their way in the work? Where do you feel you found the core of the Alexander work?
Well, firstly, I have to say, even so I worked for quite a few years, I'm not feeling in the position of knowing these things. I'm still learning a lot. So I would rather say, for me, it is always a question of trying to listen and trying to find a space. And this type of space is very difficult to maintain because it is a time factor involved with it. If I'm doing my talking, or if I'm doing my performance, or if I do whatever I do, not within my inner time, I lose it. I think Marjory Barlow put it in her book just in the beginning very good. She said something like, my only intention or goal is to keep you in pace with time, so that you don't lose, to keep you in a tempo in pace with time. I think she says this in the beginning of her book. And Mary Holland said something that Walter Carrington said. It's take your share of space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the inside, the extensioning and the widening, and it's the outside. So I would say that would be for me the thing I'd be working at the moment with, to be able to communicate with 1 year, 2 or 3 year old children.
Beautiful. Okay, we're coming towards the end of this interview, and I wonder if you could talk about any particular ambitions or plans for the future.
Well, at that time, everything is a bit open. It has changed a lot with a digital way of working. And I must say, I really experience myself much more as a body worker, as a hands-on person who wants to work with perception and physical. So I do explore the Alexander technique into a wider field in the performance, as you say, with the sound and balance. And I try to include the performance as, let's say, where you do Alexander technique in education, but I think Alexander technique is education. And for me, it is performance education. So I like to develop the work for myself and for the people I'll probably work with in the future as an education of my performance, for my creativity, for my health, and for my balance. And well, hopefully there will be a Congress in Berlin next summer.
Well, whatever you do, I'm sure it's going to be very interesting and exciting and entertaining for us all. And thank you for this interview, and thank you for letting me include some clips of you performing with your wife, Anna. She's marvelous too. The whole thing is just so charming. And I'm sure anybody watching this interview is going to enjoy that part as well.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's so nice that you do the work with the education and the Alexander technique. And I really hope that people can get something out of this interview, and it gives them an input to work with education.
Okay, well, that's marvelous. And thank you very much. And I'll see you sometime in the future in the flesh. And I'm looking forward to that. It'll be great. Very best wishes, Wolfgang.
Well, best wishes as well. Say hello to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.